Sodium vapor lamps glowed faintly along the lighthouse walls, their yellow light reflecting off the salt-crusted beams. He hummed a tune from his youth, a naval shanty his crew used to sing before the war, until the sound caught in his throat. The prosthetic eye in his right socket flickered, its green glow syncing with the lens's rotation. Below, the waves lapped at hulls that had outlived their crews, their rusted ribs whispering of things left behind. A fuel cell from one of the wrecked ships sparked in his pocket, its cold metal a relic of the child's trade. He knelt to tighten a bolt, the wrench's grip familiar as old scars, and wondered how many more nights he'd spend tending this ghost of a root before the enforcers came for the last of it. Lumen Keller's gaze fixed on the horizon, where a distant ship's smoke ribbons dissolved into the gray. His calloused fingers traced the arc of the plume, then drifted to the scar across his brow, its edges still tender beneath the salt-crusted wind. The Fresnel lens above spun, its amber and crimson light bleeding through stained glass to paint the walls in shifting hues. He knelt, wrench in hand, and pressed his palm against the rusted engine casing, the cold metal mirroring the chill in his chest. The fractured ship's wheel tattoo, the crew's laughter, the moment he'd abandoned them. The sodium lamps guttered, casting long shadows that stretched like the guilt he'd buried beneath decades of solitude. Now, the weight of survival pressed against his ribs, a silent reminder that some circuits never fully reset. Lumen Keller's gaze lingered on the harbor's shifting gloom, the sodium vapor lamps casting yellow veins through the salt-crusted beams. A flicker? No, a ripple beneath the waves. He adjusted the telescope, its brass limbs creaking like an old ship's rigging. There, between the rusted ribs of the marauder's pride, a shadow moved. Translucent, gelatinous, it slithered like a thought escaping a mind, violet eyes glowing faintly against the dark. Kaelin Vey, the child's bioluminescent veins pulsing in time with the Fresnel lens's rotation. The fuel cell clutched to his chest glowed cold, its edges frayed from desperate handling. Lumen's scar itched as he traced the stolen relic's faint circuitry, same pattern as the ones buried in his own pocket. The child's breath hitched, a whisper of static in the wind. Lumen exhaled, the fog from his breath curling around the stained glass mosaics. This wasn't a thief. This was a ghost trying to outrun the enforcer's lights. A grin flickered across his violet-hued face, pride, sharp and fleeting. The wrench bit into a corroded bolt, wrenching it free with a screech that made the stained glass mosaics shudder. Then, the crate, a metal box of spare parts toppled from the shelf, its clatter ricocheting through the tower like a gunshot. Kaelin's breath hitched, static crackling in the air. The enforcers would hear it soon. His ears twitched, catching the sound of his own heartbeat in the lighthouse's hollow belly. Lumen's gloved fingers brushed the fractured fuel cell, its cracked casing spilling faint amber light across the steel floor. The bioluminescent smear along its edge pulsed like a heartbeat, a ghostly trail that didn't belong to any known substance. His prosthetic eye flickered, its green glow sharpening as he knelt, tracing the residue's faint circuitry. It mirrored the patterns in his own pocket, buried beneath layers of grease and salt. His breath hitched. The child's touch, the same violet-hued residue that clung to Kaelin's fingers when he'd stolen the cell weeks ago, now etched into the wreckage of this relic. The lighthouse's Fresnel lens groaned above, casting jagged shadows that made the residue glow brighter, as if the tower itself were breathing. Lumen's calloused thumb hovered over the cell, the weight of his past pressing against the present, survivor's guilt, the scent of burnt circuitry, and the child's quiet defiance etched into the tower's walls. He could take it, could crush the evidence of Kalen's theft, erase the trail leading to the enforcers. But the cell's glow reminded him of the fractured ship's wheel in his tattoo, of the crew he'd failed. The tower's sodium lamps buzzed overhead, their yellow light pooling in his prosthetic socket. For once, the universe wasn't a faulty circuit. It was a fragile thing, humming with the weight of choices. The lighthouse's sodium lamps cast long shadows over the ship's deck as Lumen stalked toward the child, his prosthetic eye flickering with the faint green glow of the fuel cell's residue. Kalen crouched near the rail, fingers curled around a stolen trinket hidden in his sock. The violet-hued smear on his fingertips, matching the amber glow of the cell in Lumen's hand. The corporate ships loomed in the distance, their searchlights slicing through the fog like knives. Lumen's calloused thumb brushed the cell's fractured casing, the same circuitry etched into his tattooed forearm. For a heartbeat, he tightened his grip, the weight of survivor's guilt pressing against his ribs. Then he tossed the ration bar into Kalen's upturned palm, the stale chocolate clinking against the bioluminescent smear on his skin. "Take it," he muttered, eyes fixed on the horizon where the enforcer's lights pierced the mist. Kalen's ears twitched, the stolen trinket vanishing into his sock as he nodded once, the unspoken pact sealing itself in the space between their shared silence. Kalen's translucent form shimmered as he ascended the lighthouse's rusted stairs, the sodium lamps casting fractured light across his bioluminescent veins. The stolen fuel cells, cradled in his soot-stained hands, glowed faintly, their amber light pooling in the creases of his patched jacket. Lumen stood at the observation deck's edge, the fractured cell in his palm still warm against his calloused fingers, its circuitry mirroring the tattooed ship's wheel on his forearm. Kalen's ears twitched, the stolen trinket vanishing into his sock as he nodded, the unspoken pact sealing itself in the space between their shared silence. The enforcer's searchlights sliced the fog below. But for now, the tower's spectral light painted the trade route in hues of amber and crimson, a fragile thread of survival stitched between them. Kalen Vey's violet eyes gleamed as he brandished the rusted compass like a pirate's treasure, its iron spine curled with age. "This is a navigational artifact," he declared, voice dripping with faux grandeur. Lumen Keller's prosthetic eye flickered green, tracking the child's outstretched hand. The compass slipped from Kalen's grip, tumbling toward the sodium vapor lamps. A beat of silence, then the sock. The child's bioluminescent veins pulsed in sync with the fuel cell's cold hum, now nestled in the same frayed pocket. "You're not a pirate, kid," Lumen muttered, wrench still clutched in his calloused hand. Kalen's laughter echoed through the tower, sharp and sudden, as he snatched the sock from the floor. "And you're still a smuggler, Lumen," he retorted, eyes glinting with the Fresnel lens's indigo light. The lighthouse groaned, its salt-crusted beams trembling, as the child scurried down the spiral stairs, the sock now cradling a new trinket, this one glinting with stolen energy. Lumen exhaled, the weight in his stomach lighter than before. Lumen Keller's calloused fingers brushed the fuel cell's cold surface, its hum syncopated with the child's bioluminescent pulse. The stolen artifact glowed faintly in his palm, its edges etched with a spiral pattern, same as the sabotage marks on his old fleet's hulls. A memory surfaced, the final moment of his fleet, the shattered ship's wheel tattoo on his wrist burning like a brand. The child's sock, still warm from the reactor chamber, crinkled in his pocket. Kalen's laughter echoed below, sharp as a blade against the tower's salt-crusted beams. until Lumen's wrench clattered to the floor. The fuel cells spiral matched the Enforcer's tracking sigil, a mark he'd last seen etched into the wreckage of his crew's flagship. Same old song, same old circuit, he muttered, fingers tracing the spiral etching, identical to the Enforcer's tracking sigil. Kalen's bioluminescent veins pulsed violet, his skeletal frame hunched as he tucked a trinket into his sock. "You're late," the child said, voice slow but edged with the sharpness of a blade. Lumen's wrench clattered to the floor. "You know they're coming," he said, the words tasting of salt and static. Kalen's ears twitched, a defiant tilt to his head. "You gave me the shard. You told me to keep the reactor running." The Fresnel lens shuddered, its indigo light bleeding through stained glass. Lumen's tattooed wrist burned, a ghost of the ship's wheel he'd carved into his skin. "Then make it worth their while," he said, slotting the fuel cells into a modified circuit. The hum grew, a heartbeat thrumming between them, the child's survival, his own sabotage, and the Enforcer's scanners screaming through the tower's steel bones. Lumen's gloved fingers brushed the fractured fuel cell, its casing split like a cracked egg. A faint, bioluminescent trail pulsed from the breach, tracing a path along the engine compartment's corroded bulkhead. The glow bled through the lighthouse's stained glass, casting jagged fractals across the steel floor. His prosthetic eye flickered as he followed the trail, the pattern resembling the Enforcer's tracking sigil, same serpentine weave, same corporate branding. The air hummed with static, a whisper of the fleet's old systems still clinging to the tower's bones. He knelt, peeling back rusted panels until his tattooed wrist burned against the metal. Beneath the bulkhead, a hidden compartment yielded a data chip, its surface etched with the same corporate sigil that had burned into his ship's wheel. The weight of it pressed against his palm, proof the war hadn't ended, only buried deeper than the seabed. His breath fogged the air, mingling with the sodium lamp's yellow haze. Lumen's fingers brushed the toolkit's cold metal, its hinge creaking like a tired ship's mast. The fuel cell's hum had faded, replaced by the whisper of Kalen's bioluminescent veins pulsing faintly in the sodium vapor's yellow haze. A new weight pressed into the toolkit's compartment, a crystal, its core humming with trapped starlight. Lumen's prosthetic eye flickered green, tracing the jagged facets. The child's scent lingered. "The Enforcers are watching the lens. You'll need this." The child's sock crinkled in his pocket, the compass and crystal nestled beside the trinket. Lumen's breath hitched. This wasn't a trade anymore. It was a map, and the universe was already spinning toward the next storm. Lumen's gloved finger hovered over the fuel cell's grooves, the spectral hues of the Fresnel lens bleeding through the stained glass above. The symbol's jagged edges, too precise for scavenging, itched against his calloused palm. His prosthetic eye flickered green, tracing the material's unnervingly smooth surface. Too refined, he thought. The child's trinkets were crude, but this was factory cast. A corporate relic. His breath hitched. The compass in his pocket, its needle frozen toward the fleet's last coordinates, grew colder in his grip. The Enforcer's thermal scanners would pick up the fuel cell's heat signature. But this wasn't just theft. It was a message, a map etched in stolen light. The child's bioluminescent veins pulsed in the sodium vapor's haze, a living circuit board. Lumen's tattooed ship's wheel itched beneath his sleeve. The corporation didn't just want the trade route back. They wanted him. Kalen's fingers brushed the fuel cell's surface, its corporate smooth finish glinting under the ship's rusted overhead lights. His bioluminescent veins flared brighter than usual, casting violet shadows across the corroded bulkheads. The cell's heat signature pulsed like a heartbeat, a beacon even in the ship's decaying silence. He'd memorized every derelict vessel's layout, but tonight, the tremor in his hands, the way his skeletal frame pressed against the engine compartment's cold steel, felt wrong. The alarm's proximity warning buzzed in his skull, a staccato beat matching the frantic throb of his own pulse. One more second, he told himself, fingers tightening around the cell. The rusted door hissed open behind him, metal groaning like a wounded thing. He didn't move, didn't breathe. The enforcer's boots echoed through the hull, closer now. Kalen's throat tightened. The fuel cell's warmth seared his palm, a silent promise of the reactor's repair. He'd chosen this ritual long before the enforcer's scanners could find him. Kalen's bioluminescent veins pulsed faintly as he pressed his palm against the lighthouse's frost-etched telescope. The Fresnel lens cast amber and indigo light across the deck, illuminating Lumen's scarred face, half shrouded in shadow. "They keep me safe," he murmured, voice fraying like old wiring. "But they don't trust the enforcers." The telescope's brass fittings groaned under his grip, a sound Lumen knew well from years of maintenance. He tilted his prosthetic eye toward the lens, watching Kalen's skeletal frame shrink into the tower's skeletal architecture. "Ashen Syndicate," Lumen rasped, the word a metal shard in his throat. "Let's burn this place down," he said. "But first, I'm marking these enforcers as trespassers." The lighthouse's sodium vapor lamps cast a sickly yellow over Lumen's calloused hands as he gripped the wrench at his belt. Kalen's bioluminescent veins pulsed faintly beneath his skin, the stolen fuel cell still warm against his palm. The Fresnel lens hummed above, its spectral LIGHT, Chinese letter, ING the fog, a beacon both guide and weapon. A whirring mechanical arm broke the silence. Dr. Siren Krell's prosthetic limb unfolded with precise hiss, tracking her movements. "You're not here to fix the reactor," he said, offering a ration bar. Her mechanical fingers hesitated, then flexed. "I'm here because your kid's already dead," she replied, the words a metal shard in his throat. The fuel cell's warmth seared his palm, now a tether to the child's secret web. Krell's gaze met his, and for a heartbeat, the tower's shadows carried the weight of shared loss. The lighthouse's sodium vapor lamps sputtered as a jagged arc of electricity split the air, igniting the stained glass panels in a kaleidoscope of amber and crimson. Lumen's prosthetic eye flickered, tracking the surge through the control panel's scorched wires. "Foolproof system," he muttered, wrench in hand. Kalen's bioluminescent veins flared brighter, his fingers brushing the fuel cell's warmth as he crouched beside the relay box. "This isn't a ship circuit," he said, voice steady despite the static crackling around his fingertips. "It's a fault in the lens, its lights frying the grid." Lumen's scar twitched. "Then you fix it. You've got a talent for dying in inconvenient places." Kalen's sarcasm cut through the haze, but his hands moved faster than his words, bypassing the relay with a jagged wire. The arc surged again, and he flinched, then held the connection, his glowing eyes locked on Lumen's. "It's not just the light," he said. "The enforcer scanners are synced to the lens. If we don't reroute the power..." His voice died as the Fresnel lens shuddered, its hum rising to a scream. Lumen grabbed his wrench, slamming the final fuse into place. The light stabilized, but the tower's shadows now carried the weight of Krell's approaching footsteps. He twisted the cell's terminals, rerouting the surge through the Fresnel lens's ancient wiring. The tower shuddered as the drone's artificial heart overloaded, its metallic frame buckling under the strain. Kalen's bioluminescent veins pulsed in time with the tower's groan, his small hands gripping the relay box's edges as the drone's thrusters roared. "Now," Lumen barked, slamming the final connection. The drone lurched, its body spiraling into the harbor's churning dark. Salt spray hissed through the broken lens, casting the observation deck in jagged light. Kalen's glow dimmed, his violet eyes flicking to Lumen's scarred face. "You're not alone anymore," the protagonist whispered, wrench still in hand. The drone's wreckage sank, and the lighthouse's sodium lamps sputtered back to life, casting long shadows where the enforcer's boots would soon echo. The lighthouse's sodium lamps sputtered against the storm's crescendo, their yellow glow bleeding into the Fresnel lens's fractured light. Kalen's translucent form flickered like a dying circuit as he slithered past the rusted staircase, his patched jacket snagging on the iron railing. "You're not alone anymore," he murmured, the words fraying at the edges. Kalen's violet eyes tracked the wrench's glow, then flicked to the archive's sealed door across the room, where shadows pooled like spilled ink. The enforcer's tracker had found his trail, but the child's fingers curled around a stolen fuel cell, its fractured core humming against his palm, a relic of the fleet, now a bridge between two ghosts. Lumen's wrench dipped, then rested, as the child's breathing synced with the lighthouse's spectral pulse. "It's not a lie," Lumen muttered, his voice fraying like the rope. "It's a promise you don't break." Kalen's violet eyes narrowed, then flicked to the fuel cell tucked in his sleeve, its fractured core pulsing in time with the lighthouse's hum. The child's bioluminescent veins shimmered, tracing the knot's loops in the air. "Sounds like a story," Kalen said, his sarcasm dissolving into a hum that wove through the tower's spectral light. Lumen's wrench dipped, then rested against his belt, the metal humming a counter-rhythm to the child's tune, a fragile truce between ghosts and the living. Kalen's fingers closed around Lumen's wrist, the touch fraying the air like static. "Iron Wren," they whispered, pressing a chipped mug into Lumen's palm. The ceramic was warm, etched with a fleet symbol Lumen hadn't seen since the war, its curves jagged, almost defiant. Kalen's violet eyes glittered as they darted to the fuel cell tucked in their sleeve, its fractured core pulsing in sync with the lighthouse's hum. "You're the last of the Iron Wren," the child said, their voice a rasp of laughter. "Says the ghost who forgot how to die." Lumen's prosthetic eye flickered, catching the sodium lamp's glow as he traced the mug's grooves. "And you're the ghost who still steals," he replied, but his wrench dipped, resting against the mug's rim. Kalen's bioluminescent veins shimmered, tracing the word Wren in the air before they sprinted, a trinket clutched in their sock. The tower's spectral light stretched, a fragile truce woven between the living and the ghostly. Lumen's wrench hovered over the steam valve's corroded seam as Alara's boots echoed on the iron staircase. She carried a satchel slung across her shoulder, its straps frayed from hauling dismantled drones. "This thing's been leaking for weeks," she muttered, knuckles brushing the valve's rusted edges. Lumen's prosthetic eye flickered, tracking the scar on her forearm, a jagged line matching his own. "You're not from the fleet," he said, voice a gravelly rasp. She didn't flinch. "I'm the ghost who remembered how to die." The words hung between them, thick as the lighthouse's sodium haze. He tightened a bolt, letting the metal's resistance ground his suspicion. She worked the valve's lever, the hiss of steam rising like a ghost. When the mechanism shuddered, Alara met his gaze. "Your crew didn't forget how to die," she said, thumb brushing the fractured fuel cell in her pocket. "They died waiting for someone to fix the valve." Lumen's wrench stilled. The Fresnel lens overhead pulsed indigo, casting their shadows long across the deck. Alara's wrench clattered against the valve as Kalen's laughter sliced through the lighthouse's sodium haze. "Pirates don't just drown ships," the child chided, fingers splayed over the foghorn's rusted lever. "They sing to them." Lumen's prosthetic eye twitched as the kid's bioluminescent veins pulsed violet, casting their shadows across the deck like stained glass ghosts. The foghorn roared, its voice a guttural snarl, and the ground shuddered. Steam erupted from the valve, hissing like a spiteful serpent, drenching Lumen in a curtain of fog. "You liar," he barked, slicked back hair dripping salt water. Alara snorted, wrench raised to her temple. "That's not a geyser. That's a pirate's welcome mat." Kalen's laughter rang out, sharp and bright, as they chased their own shadow across the Fresnel lens's indigo glow. Lumen's wrench hovered, dripping, as the steam cleared to reveal the child's grinning face, tiny and defiant, a storm in a sock. Siren Krell's gloved fingers hovered over the fractured fuel cell, her breath fogging the glass casing. The fleet's symbol, Lumen's old command's crest, was etched into the cracks like a scar. "This wasn't just a meltdown," she murmured, voice fraying. "It was a message. The ghost ship didn't just crash, it sank the fleet." Lumen's prosthetic eye flickered, the green glow dimming. Alara's laughter died as Siren named the crew. "Captain Vera, I knew you'd come back to this tower, and I knew you'd still be the one who let them die." Their bioluminescent veins pulsed violet as they slid a fuel cell across the table, its casing cracked like a bone. "Trade," they said, voice slow, "for the reactor." Lumen's prosthetic eye flickered, green light catching the lens's glow. He met Kalen's gaze, calloused fingers brushing the child's, once a stranger's touch, now a silent pact. Siren Krell's gloved hand closed over the fuel cell, her breath fogging the glass. "You knew," she murmured. "The ghost ship didn't just crash." Alara Voss leaned back, her scarred knuckles tapping the table. "It sank the fleet, and you let them die." The room stilled. Then Kalen's hand slipped into their sock, pulling out a trinket, a tiny, glowing anchor. "For the ghost ship," they said, pressing it into Lumen's palm. "To toast." Lumen's laugh was a wrench turning, rough and steady. "To the ghost ship." The words hung, a fragile thread between them, as distant engines roared beyond the tower's walls. Lumen's calloused fingers tightened around the wrench, the metal biting into his palm as he unscrewed the drone's sensor array. The lighthouse's sodium vapor lamps flickered, casting jagged shadows over the rusted framework. A hiss of steam erupted from the base of the tower, and he yanked the valve, sending a plume of white mist spiraling upward. The air grew thick, the scent of brine and burning metal clogging his nostrils. When the fog cleared, he stood ankle-deep in the haze, his coat soaked through, the old scar on his wrist searing like it had the night the fleet collapsed. Kalen's violet-veined hand clamped over his, their small fingers trembling. "You idiot," they whispered, eyes darting to Alara's rifle slung across her shoulder. Lumen's laugh was a ragged exhale, the sound swallowed by the rising din of distant engines. "The ghost ship doesn't sink," he said, dragging Kalen behind Alara's bulk. "It survives." Siren Krell's gloved hand hovered over the fuel cell in her palm, its fractured casing glowing faintly. The enforcer's boots thundered against the tower's steel reinforcements, and Lumen's prosthetic eye flickered, green light cutting through the mist like a blade. Lumen's fingers trembled as he angled the fuel cell under the Fresnel lens's amber light, the fractured casing casting jagged shadows across his scarred wrist. The symbol, faintly glowing, like a dying star, burned into his retinas. This wasn't a scavenger's mark. The memory surged, salt spray and screaming hulls, his hands gripping the ship's wheel as it crumpled beneath him. The fleet's last breaths echoed in his skull, a chorus of why and what if. Kalen's small hand clutched the rusted wrench, their violet-veined fingers stark against the tool's corroded metal. "You're going to blow us up again," they murmured, voice frayed like old wiring. Lumen's prosthetic eye flickered green, a blade of light cutting through the lighthouse's sodium haze. "No," he growled, the word tasting of rust and regret. "I'm going to make them regret they ever found this place." The enforcer's boots thundered closer, syncopated against the steel tower, and Kalen's grip tightened. "Stay," Lumen whispered, not to the child, but to the ghost of his crew. "For once, let me be the one who stays." Valen's voice, smooth as a blade's edge, echoed from the staircase. "Lumen Keller. You didn't think your ghosts could stay hidden, did you?" The enforcer's gloved hand slammed the ledger onto the observation deck, its pages fluttering like ravens. "This isn't your war," he growled, voice frayed like old wiring. Valen's smirk widened. "But your child's fuel cells, those are my trophies." The child's grip tightened, their patched jackets snagging on the ladder's rusted rungs. Lumen's chest ached. The guilt of abandonment clashed with the iron resolve to keep the child's light alive, even as the enforcer's boots thundered closer. Valen's smirk froze. The enforcer's gloved fingers snatched the tablet, but not before Kalen's glowing veins flared brighter, etching the crew's names into the air in shimmering script. "This isn't about fuel cells anymore, Keller. It's about the ghosts you couldn't bury. Take the kid and go," he roared, his voice cracking over the din of his own heartbeat. The enforcer drones circled now, their red lenses glowing like hungry eyes through the mist. Alara's hand closed over Kalen's wrist, her grip iron. "You're not running," she said, her voice steady. Lumen's prosthetic eye flickered green, tracing the drone's trajectories. The fuel cell's symbol burned in his palm, a grave marker, a weapon, a lifeline. He could leave. He could let the ghosts of his crew decide his fate. But the child's grip on Alara's hand was already tighter than any chain. The enforcer drone's hum sharpened, their red lenses cutting through the lighthouse's spectral haze. Alara's grip on Kalen's wrist tightened, her knuckles whitening against the child's pulse. "We don't run from ghosts," she said, her voice a low thrum beneath the storm. Kalen's bioluminescent veins flared brighter, a violet cascade across their translucence, as they stepped forward. The child's hand, small and skeletal, closed around Lumen's prosthetic wrist. "You're not alone," they whispered, the words fraying like thread. A crystal glowing faintly with the same jagged fuel cell symbol pressed into his palm. Lumen's breath hitched. The weight wasn't just metal, it was a fracture in the gilt, a pulse of something alive. Alara's eyes met his, steady as the lighthouse's rotating lens. The drone's whine climbed. He could feel the child's grip flex, a silent bargain. Stay, protect, survive. His prosthetic eye flickered green, not as a weapon, but a compass. The storm of his own heartbeat slowed. Lumen's fingers found the steam valve's rusted lever with the precision of a man who'd once calibrated warship's boilers. The lighthouse's iron skeleton groaned as he twisted, copper pipes hissing like serpents. Kalen's breath hitched beside him, their bioluminescent veins flaring brighter, violet lightning across translucence, as the first burst of steam erupted. Lumen's prosthetic eye flickered green, not a weapon, but a compass, tracking the enforcer's drones through the mist. "This isn't a game," he muttered, wrenching another valve. The tower shuddered, sodium lamps sputtering, their yellow glow swallowed by the rising fog. Kalen's grip tightened on his wrist, a silent question. Lumen didn't answer. The explosion came like a held breath, sudden, scalding, a curtain of white that swallowed the harbor. The drones whined, their red lenses blinding in the haze. For a heartbeat, Lumen felt the old guilt coil, then snapped it into focus. The child's veins dimmed, awed, as the mist swallowed the enforcer's hum. The lighthouse shuddered, its iron bones groaning as Lumen's wrench slipped from his grip. Kalen's bioluminescent veins flared crimson, a heartbeat sync with the drone's whining red lenses. Then, silence. The mist thickened, swallowing the hum of machinery. From the harbor's maw, shadows coiled. A dozen figures emerged, their scavenged masks glinting like fractured glass. Lumen's prosthetic eye flickered, tracking the movement of a rusted compass clutched by the lead figure, a jagged gear spinning in its center. "You're not the only one who's buried ships," the masked voice rasped, its breath fogging the lens. Kalen's fingers twitched toward their pocket, but Lumen's hand shot out, gripping their wrist. "We fight with ghosts," the figure murmured, dropping the compass into Lumen's palm. The syndicate's weapons dissolved into mist, their masks peeling back to reveal weathered faces. Hope uncoiled in Lumen's chest, slow as the lighthouse's lens grinding through fog. Kalen's veins dimmed to violet, a question lingering in their stillness. His prosthetic eye flickered, syncing with the rhythm of his breath as he muttered, "This ends here." Kalen's bioluminescent veins pulsed violet, their trembling fingers clutching the stolen crystal. "You don't get to decide that," the child rasped, pressing the crystal to their chest. The gesture was a ritual, a trade of stolen fuel cells for rare minerals, but tonight it felt like a pact. Alara's voice cut through the haze, her words sharp as a scalpel. "Signal flare, now." The flare erupted, its golden light bleeding into the lighthouse's Fresnel lens, fracturing the night. Below, syndicate ships groaned to life, their engines roaring like wounded beasts. Lumen's grip tightened on the wrench, his resignation dissolving into a resolve as sharp as the lenses refracted light. The engine room reeked of rust and scorched metal, its skeletal framework groaning as if the lighthouse itself resisted Valen's intrusion. Lumen's prosthetic eye flared crimson, mirroring the plasma cutter's arc as it seared toward his throat. Kalen's bioluminescent veins pulsed violet, their skeletal frame trembling as they lunged between Lumen and Valen. "This isn't your war," the child rasped, wrench clutched like a weapon. Valen snarled, his plasma cutter sputtering against the steam pipes. But Kalen's luminous eyes locked onto the enforcer's scarred cheek. "You burned my people," the child whispered, their voice fraying like torn wiring. The air crackled, a barrier of stolen light and whispered threats. Valen recoiled, his shadow dissolving into the storm drain's darkness. Lumen's grip tightened. "Let's go," he said, the weight of resolve settling into his bones like a repaired circuit. The lighthouse's iron staircase groaned beneath Lumen's boots as he climbed, steam hissing from the valves he'd rigged in the engine room. His prosthetic eye flared crimson, tracking the flicker of Valen's shadow through the rusted gratings. "You think this is a game, Thorn?" Lumen rasped, wrench in hand, the fractured ship's wheel tattoo burning beneath his sleeve. The air reeked of scorched metal and Kalen's stolen fuel cell, a jagged gear humming with stolen light, its cobalt glow bleeding into the sodium vapor lamps. The child's bioluminescent veins pulsed violet, their skeletal frame hunched behind a stack of rusted pipes. "This isn't your war," Kalen whispered, voice fraying like torn wiring. Lumen's grip tightened. "No," he said, jaw clenched, "but it's my ship." He slammed a valve, the pressure chamber erupting in a scream of steam. Metal beams groaned, collapsing into a labyrinth of scalding mist. Valen snarled, his scarred cheek glinting in the lens's amber light, but the maze swallowed him whole. A collapsing circuit of Lumen's old skills, now wired for survival. The plasma cutter's roar split the lighthouse's skeletal ribs, its blue-white flame searing through the steel reinforcements. Lumen's prosthetic eye flared crimson as he lunged, wrench in hand, but Valen's laughter echoed through the collapsing tower. Lumen's grip tightened on the child's wrist. "This isn't your war," Kalen hissed, voice fraying like torn wiring. "But it's my ship," Lumen growled, yanking them both into the smoke-choked maze. Fuel cells glowed jaggedly in the rubble, their cobalt light bleeding into the sodium, vapor lamps. Kalen's fingers brushed Lumen's forearm, guiding him through the scalding mist, a path carved by stolen light and whispered defiance. "Hold on," they murmured, their breath fogging the air. The structure groaned, then screamed, collapsing in a cascade of metal and flame. Lumen's tattoo of the fractured ship's wheel burned beneath his sleeve, a relic of guilt now wrenched into survival. As the debris settled, their hands stayed entwined, the child's pulse steady against his chest. The lighthouse's shattered windows framed the engine room like a broken kaleidoscope, spectral light bleeding through cracks in the granite. Sodium vapor lamps sputtered along the walls, casting Kalen's bandaged side in a sickly yellow glow. Lumen's torn shirt, frayed at the edges, still clung to the child's wrist, their fingers curled around the last intact fuel cell. The air reeked of scorched metal and salt, the remnants of the Fresnel lens's amber glow now smoldering in the rubble. Kalen's